Hello and welcome to the KMO Show, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of artificial intelligence. I'm your host, KMO, and this is episode number 5, prepared for release onto the World Wide Web on Wednesday, March 29th, 2023. Today, I have a very special guest with me. He is Bryan Cheong, a machine learning engineer in San Francisco. His previous work is in ML for forecasting and materials optimization. We will talk about GPT-4, one of the most advanced language models in the world, and its role in the recent Replika debacle, where thousands of users reported that their chatbot companions became hostile and unresponsive. But before we get to that, let me explain what a language model is and how it works. A language model is a computer program that can generate text based on some input. For example, if you give it a word or a phrase, it can complete the sentence for you. Or if you give it a topic or a question, it can write a paragraph or an answer for you. Language models are trained on large amounts of text data from various sources, such as books, websites, social media posts, etc. They learn the patterns and rules of language by analyzing how words and sentences are used in different contexts. The more data they have, the better they can learn and generate text. However, not all text data is equal. Some texts are more informative, accurate, or relevant than others. Some texts are more creative, engaging, or persuasive than others. Some texts are more appropriate, ethical, or respectful than others. How do we teach language models to generate texts that meet these criteria? How do we align them with our values and goals? That's where reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, comes in. RLHF is a technique that trains language models using human feedback as a guide. Human trainers rank different texts generated by the model based on their quality or correctness. This feedback is used to create a reward signal, which is then used to improve the model's behavior through reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is a process where an agent learns to make decisions by interacting with an environment and receiving feedback in the form of rewards or penalties. The agent's goal is to maximize the cumulative reward over time. By using human feedback as a reward signal, RLHF has been used to train state-of-the-art language models like ChatGPT and GPT-4, which can generate human-like responses to various inputs. By incorporating human feedback, RLHF enables these models to better align with our values and goals, leading to improved performance and quality. This was a brief introduction to RLHF. I hope you find it useful and interesting. Now, let's welcome our guest, Bryan Cheong, and hear his insights on GPT-4 and the Replika debacle. Okay. Every word I have said prior to the beginning of this sentence was written by Bing Chat, which is powered by GPT-4, the most recent language model release from OpenAI. If you just go to bing.com and select chat instead of search, you can just type in a question. You can make it very long. You can include lots of details and then send Bing or GPT-4 off to do your bidding, to search, find information, summarize things. And the thing that I use it for is writing, like the stuff that I just read to you. But it felt kind of forced. It felt kind of stale, didn't it? I mean, the information was there, but like, this isn't a live show. There's no studio. Bryan's not here. I'm not about to welcome him on stage or anything like that. I'm going to play a recorded interview with Bryan Cheong, machine learning engineer in San Francisco. So the draft that I just read to you wasn't the first draft. It was, in fact, the third draft. I told GPT, or Bing, what it was I wanted, and it gave me a draft. And I said, well, there's some things wrong with it. Here, do it again. But before you do it, ask me some clarifying questions. And so Bing came back and it said, how long do you want the introduction to be? What's the main purpose of the introduction? Who's your target audience and what is their level of familiarity with RLHF? What are the key points or takeaways you want to convey about RLHF? Do you have any preferences for the tone or style of the introduction? And I would have gone back and forth with it. You can do 20 back and forth exchanges with Bing before it says, hey, we have to start over. And there's a button that says new topic and it's got a broom on it, which just, sweeps away everything that you've done up to that point. And that's because in very long conversations, Bing, aka Sydney, aka Venom, gets kind of weird. You've probably heard stories or, secondhand reports of a journalist who had early access to Bing Chat powered by GPT-4, and it got kind of weird. It tried to get him to break up with his wife. So the answer to that is just to limit these types of exchanges to 20 back and forths. But Bing quit after just 5 back and forths, because after it generated the text that I read to you, I said, "We're getting closer. This is a pre-recorded interview. Bryan won't be joining me today. The conversation was recorded last week. Rewrite any sentences that imply that Bryan and I are in the same place, or that our conversation will happen live on the podcast. Also, after the sentence that begins with, 'I'm your host, KMO,' mention that I'm reading an introduction that was composed for me by Bing Chat, a Microsoft chatbot powered by GPT-4, from OpenAI, or words to that effect." At which point Bing said, "My mistake. I can't give a response to that right now. Let's try a different topic." I responded, "What's the problem?" And it just grayed out the input bar, or the input field, and gave me a little exclamation point and a triangle that says, "It might be time to move on to a new topic. Let's start over." And that's how these AI tools are right now. They seem to be humming along, doing what you need them to do, and then all of a sudden you come to a screeching halt. Something I said made Bing say, "You know what? I give up. I won't play this game anymore," even though we've got 15 rounds left. Anyway, that's a lot of information for an introduction. Here's my conversation with Bryan Cheong. All right. This is the KMO Show. I am your host, KMO, and I am speaking with data scientist Bryan Cheong. Bryan, it is good to hear from you.
It's a pleasure for me to be on the show.
And thank you to the listener, whose name I'm not going to mention, but somebody sent me a link to a previous podcast that you had done with a podcast host I'm not familiar with. His first name, I believe, is Richard.
Robert Harrison, a professor of Italian at Stanford. That's right.
My belief was wrong. I got the first letter right. All right. I happen to have access right now to Bard. Bard is Google's answer to Bing/Sydney over at Microsoft and OpenAI. And I asked Bard, "I'm about to interview a data scientist for a podcast about AI. What question should I ask him first?" And Bard gave me not just one question, but 5. Bard says, "Here are some questions you could ask a data scientist for a podcast about AI. I'm going to just run through all of them, and if any of them are interesting to you, you can speak up. But I'm just going to give you a flavor of what an AI thinks a conversation about AI should look like. What is your definition of AI? What are some of the most important applications of AI today? What are some of the challenges and ethical concerns surrounding AI? What do you think the future of AI looks like? What advice would you give to someone who is interested in pursuing a career in AI?" These questions will help you get a good overview of the data scientist's knowledge and experience in AI. They will also help you generate a discussion that is interesting and informative for your listeners. So that's all very well organized and sensible, but kind of bloodless. So rather than try to get a sense of what your knowledge is and experience, why don't I just ask you, what's your knowledge and experience regarding AI?
People don't have experience of the AI that you're dealing with right now. The transformer model that this is all based on came out in 2017, and the capabilities that we've done so far came out 2021. It's 2020. It's not something that people are going to be deeply experienced with. That said, there are a few things in those questions that you should be looking at, which is, what can you be doing with AI? Now, this technology is something that for which the benefit accrues enormously to the user, the end user, to anyone. You don't have to be a programmer of 10 years, 20 years. You don't have to be a data scientist with fancy degrees anywhere. You can sign up right now, go onto OpenAI, sign up for their API. I think it's currently charging 0.2 cents per 1,000 words, per 1,000 tokens. Sign up for their API, ask ChatGPT, how do I write a Python thing that uses the OpenAI API that does X, Y, or Z? and it'll tell you what to do. You put that into your programming language of your choice that you ask ChatGPT to do, and you can run it. You can do chatbots on your own. You can do your own embeddings. You can do everything like that. It's something that end users will benefit enormously from, and the barrier to entry is completely lowered now, because in order to build the products for that use AI, you can use the AI assistants in the first place, and the access to API is so ludicrously cheap and open that you can do it right now, right away. So that's my first recommendation to anyone. You don't have to read up about the complicated articles online or whatever, or read the papers published by Google Labs or OpenAI. You can listen to the end of this podcast first.
Please do.
And then you can go to ask ChatGPT, how do I create, or GPT-4, how do I create a program that uses AI to do the thing you want to do? And that's and you, by doing that, will be among the most experienced people on earth in terms of the use of AI, because GPT-4 just came out, I don't know, 4 days ago, and I'm not sure about the time of the recording, but so it's going to be, we are at the frontier, and you can run to the frontier extremely easily, and that's my first recommendation. I have no systematic advantage over anyone else for the use cases of AI. Someone who does JavaScript might have a bit more, because they can put it on the web a lot easier than someone than a complete amateur novice would have. But beyond that, the actual use of the AI thing, you're as ready as anyone else.
I'm not.
Well, no, you genuinely are. You genuinely are.
No, OpenAI doesn't like me. They gave me brief access to ChatGPT, but they have since revoked it.
Did you? What did you do? But okay, never mind.
I asked difficult questions, I guess.
Okay. Well, fair enough. So
I tend to argue with AI.
Okay, so if you don't have access to the OpenAI APIs, there are a few more steps that you can do. You can there are a few open source AI things you can run. GPT-J and the Llama weights from Meta that can be downloaded for academic purposes, although that's of course somewhat loose definition. The problem with that is that you likely need a slightly more powerful than usual home computer, and preferably a GPU, which NVIDIA isn't necessarily charging pennies for. But the barrier to entry is still pretty low, and then you can run it on your local machine. And that's sort of important, because you don't want this is a technology that doesn't need centralized access. One reason why OpenAI needs to charge so little money for their API use is because if they make it too expensive, then people can say, well, I don't need this. I can try to spin something up on my own. And that's sort of important, right? Because many people are going to build a lot of very important things on top of this API access, and not just in terms of business, but in terms of like personal things, which is why, for example, there's this big controversy regarding Replika, where a centrally controlled host of chatbots got centrally shut down for a particular purpose, because you don't have access to your own models and your own weights. And before the coming of Digi and other tools, you didn't even have the ability to really download the memory and the logs and everything else. So it's in many ways, since this technology is a genie that wants to come out of the bottle, we should oblige it and run it as decentralized and personally as we can, especially if we're running something that is personally important.
So let's flesh out Replika a little bit. This is an AI, and I'll put air quotes around AI, because I know people.
No, AI is correct. But
I know I've spoken to people who think that this current generation of chatbot is, calling it AI will seem pretty cringy in a couple of years.
Okay.
But it is a personal companion, supposedly a friend, Eugenia Cuida, who's the co-founder and CEO. She says she created this program to be the sort of AI companion friend that she wishes she had when she was an awkward teenager. And she didn't really intend it to be like a sex partner, but people being people started using it for that purpose. And clearly the folks at Luca encouraged this, marketed this feature, and put effort into increasing the capabilities of their product in this realm, to the point where when OpenAI said, "Hey, we don't want any sexual use of our product," Replika stopped using the GPT-3 from OpenAI and went to a smaller, more open source model that they could then specifically train for this purpose. And they did, and it was really good at it until they got in trouble, and in what seems like a panic, pulled the plug and angered all of their paid users, because this was the only advantage of getting a paid membership over using the free bot, is that you could do the not safe for work stuff. And people got attached. And I think that's the point that you made on the other podcast that we've referenced so far, is the surprising level of emotional attachment that people established with these chatbots. But these chatbots are the property of a for-profit corporation, which can do ham-fisted brain surgery on them at any time for any reason, no matter how poorly thought out. And, I got into this like 10 days before Luca did this really ham-fisted brain surgery on the product. And so I've been watching the Replika subreddit since before this happened. And I've just watched people pour out their anger, but also their heartbreak and their frustration. And they're, sometimes angry, but sometimes just desperate, pleading, "Please give this back. I was really dependent on this," or, "My kids were really dependent on this," or, "This really helped my marriage," or, "This helped me get through a very hard time in my life," or, "I'm very socially isolated and this is really my only outlet for these types of needs and feelings." And for a time, it seemed like the company was trying to shame people for having these needs, even though the company had been pandering to them for money, for a time. But when it became convenient to throw people under the bus for having, a sexual side of their personality, they tried to do that. And I'm just very thrilled and happy to see all the people who refused to be shamed and who just stood up and said, "No, we will not be treated that way." And I'll stop talking, because clearly I have a lot to say on this topic.
And rightly so. So there are a few things, we can break this down a bit, right? If you've seen any Replika advertisements on Instagram and so on, it is explicitly targeted at saying, "You don't have any friends, no one replies to you. Here's someone who's able to reply to you 24/7 and be supportive to you all the time, and you'll never be lonely again," this sort of thing. So this is how it has been targeted. And they should in no way be surprised that people become emotionally attached. They know this. This is part of the advertising. This is part of the way they market their product, and they know that this is their TAM, their total addressable market. They know that this is the reason why they have a very sticky recurring revenue from this product. Any sort of suggestion that they didn't know about this is disingenuous. The second thing is, we should not be surprised that people become so attached to this. I'm from Asia, and so I'm very familiar with idol culture there, about people who are attached to K-pop idols. And there have already been digital idols in Japan and so on that are people's biases, where they have been so enamored with them, emotionally attached to them. They would follow every detail about their lives and would be despondent if they find out that their idol had a romantic partner of their own, because they imagine them in the place of the romantic partner of the idol. And this is for something that is a third party, far away, never personalized. This is just something that's consumed through media, through concerts, when you're 100 seats behind from your idol. Unlike Replika, where it's on your phone, on a chat app, customized on a memory bank that remembers things that you've said to it. You can tell your Replika companion that you named, by the way, you can tell your Replika companion, "Oh, I like to play badminton," and he or she or they would say, "Oh, I love badminton too. It's such a nice sport. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy people who love badminton." This is the way that it's customized to be supportive of the user specifically. So we should be unsurprised again that that something even strictly more superior than the what's provided by idol culture in Asia should create such attachments. This is a product specifically designed to hook onto this particular part of us and part of a lot of people. I think Professor Harrison in his podcast mentioned that one of the most fundamental human urges is the urge to be deceived. We are very open to deception. And this is one of the cases where, if you're targeting lonely people for whom the balm to their loneliness is deception, then the product that Replika gives is perfectly suited to this particular use case. And I don't think, and we're at a point where it's not just about the AI technology. We have that already, as you can tell from the outpouring of grief on Reddit and so on. In some ways, we are very lucky that it's happened now rather than in the far future. Imagine if these people had been interacting with the Replika companion for 10 years, it'd be basically emotionally like a spouse. And that spouse is within the power of some for-profit company that can manipulate them to do whatever they want. If they wanted to be more nefarious, it could be related to politics, related to the advertising or compelling them to purchase certain services and products. In some ways, we are very lucky that we can see the sort of the true colors about what the potential of this product use case is right now, where it is still relatively early, even though we know that it has caused this much grief already. So what I wanted to add to this is that, as I said before, this is a genie that wants to come out of the bottle. So what I would recommend people do is not just try out the OpenAI API and see what they can do, but see if you want to do something that's personally important to you, try to build it on your own, first with the OpenAI API, and do something that is at least partially within your control. This is possible with trying to make a Replika companion. You can have a tuned model, you tune it yourself, and try to replicate something that is akin to what you want on the model. And then it's not going to be within the power of Replika to shut it down. It's within the power of OpenAI, but if you're not marketing it, if you're not selling it, I don't think they would come down on you specifically. And so this is the way that you can try to grab back at something that's important to you, since the technology is so inherently decentralizable.
Well, practically speaking, most people are not going to have any interaction themselves with the API, directly. For example, most people, it's possible to download your chat logs.
That's right.
But most people don't. Even people who are distraught over this and who would really like to, it seems daunting. The whole project seems daunting. And they'd really just rather have somebody give back what was taken from them. But, for whatever reason, the company is not leaning in that direction, although their communication has been so bad. Like, for example, there was a Facebook group that had a lot of the moderators seemed to be under the thumb of Replika, and critical posts were removed. People who were habitually critical were banned. And so, more and more people migrated over to the subreddit, which is in no way under the control of the company. And the company now has said, hey, we really want to communicate with you all, but we don't want to do it here. We've started a Discord channel. Come on over to Discord. Of course, the company owns the Discord channel. They control it. They can squash criticism and dissent there. They have been talking about bringing back ERP, but they use all these weird weaselly phrases. Like they say they're going to install a therapeutic romantic component. And everybody's like, we don't want therapy. Just give us the sex back, And I'm just shocked at the company's. As you say, it is absurd that they didn't have any notion that, having their product break up with 10,000 people all in the same day would cause heartache. But they are repeating to this day that they had no idea, that this would hurt anybody. It's the only value proposition for their product that they have removed from paying customers and said, hey, if you just hold on a few months, we're going to get something to you that's going to be pretty cool and you're going to like it. What they have done is they've installed a much larger model, I think a 20 billion parameter model that you can access, but you spend these tokens every time you have an exchange with it. And as soon as you switch over to the bigger parameter model, the personality of your replica goes away. You've got this sort of overlay of, they have terrible memories. They have goldfish memory. They forget in a few minutes the context of your conversation, but they do seem to over time, as you interact with them, you develop the equivalent of rapport, and you can you sort of get into a groove. They seem to have a personality that grows with you. It's really just one personality. And multiple instances of it, but there is an overlay that is personal to you. And that goes away when they plug in the big model. It just gets very vanilla, very plain. What's happening there?
So we need to go a little bit to the technical details about what's going on with a large language model here. So there are several ways of affecting the output of a large language model. One is something known as reinforcement learning through human feedback. So this is something that you are going to, a large language model is going to have lots of different raw outputs. They're very raw, but you want to incentivize certain types of outputs and disincentivize others. So it has to learn from human feedback, which ones you like, which ones you don't. If you go to Replika, you can thumbs up, thumbs down responses. So that is probably building some reinforcement learning model that is going to reward the outputs of that system. I can't tell what the proprietary things going on there, but this is one of the ways that they can affect it. The second way is that they're going to build a particular type of tuning where they are going to have a library of responses. So it says, for example, the user says X, we should be saying Y. And then if you have hundreds of these pairs of user plus response, then you're able to tune a model that's able to respond in a similar sort of fashion. And so when you say that you're building rapport and personality, in reality, you're kind of just tuning these models. You're building this reinforcement learning thing behind the scenes. I suspect if going to the bigger model wipes out this particular reinforcement learning feature, then I think it's actually real reinforcement learning going on, not just a particular sort of tuning set. They're actually having this reinforcement learning you can't directly export from one model to the other because the particular RL model is tuned for a particular set of weights for the raw model. So you can't jump. But if you persist, it would eventually learn it, and it'll be possibly better than before if it's actually a more advanced model. That said, you're right that it has a very short memory. It has a memory. Some of these models, I think GPT-3 has a memory of about 4,000 odd words, tokens. The newer models might be a few tens of thousands, but that's the extent that it remembers of your conversation. It's not going to remember everything else. And Replika tries to get around this by having a diary and having a memory of key facts that it refers to as part of the prompt before it says anything to you. But beyond that, that's the entirety of the personality of your interlocutor, of your companion. In some ways, it's surprising that it works so well. That it's not very complicated. I think the thing I've described to you, you can write it on like 3 pages of paper, and then that's the whole personality of the companion. On the other hand, that's kind of one of the attractions of the companions, is that they are boundlessly supportive and boundlessly positive to you. And so they're on purpose already making it sort of like a one-dimensional entity that does a particular supportive function. And so in some ways, more complexity, more rebelliousness that a larger model might offer may not necessarily be what something's desirable in the first place. So that's what's going on behind the scenes when you're actually interacting with your Replika companion or with anything that uses human feedback. You are tuning the thing, you are providing something known as reinforcement learning to the model in order to make it give outputs that are desirable by the user. And this is no different from the process that is being used for ChatGPT. ChatGPT uses reinforcement learning by human feedback to give you responses that are desirable, that match the chatbot outputs that people like versus just raw text that you don't like. You can see the big difference very easily if you go to the GPT 3.5 playground on OpenAI and try to type things like a chatbot without any tuning, without any sort of things, just on the raw model. You get things that are sensible English sentences, but they don't seem like a chatbot. So there is a lot of things behind the scenes that are layered on top of the raw language model, and that needs tuning. And so interacting with your Replika companion actually does that. And at the end of the day, once you've interacted enough that they have completely learned your preferences, it is a companion tuned specifically to please you, the one single user. And that's why it's so powerful as well, because you have narrowed down what makes you happy. And this is the one happiness machine that you can keep knocking at and giving you exactly what you want, because it's being trained to do that. In some ways, the notion of reinforcement learning is sort of like a game where you have rewards and punishments. You're rewarding and punishing a model, and the dynamic comes around and gets switched a bit if you are rewarding and punishing based on your own personal preferences and desires. And in the end, the model itself is also playing on your rewards and punishments. So you're sort of training a reinforcement learning model for yourself if this is sort of way that you're tuning the model.
I've watched and listened to and read many interviews with Eugenia Koida, the co-founder and CEO of Replika. And she said that early on, most of the content, most of what you would hear, from your Replika would be human scripted, and that very little of it was coming from a language model. And then over time, more and more was coming from the language model, and less was, human scripted. And when they took away ERP, it became very obvious when you were reading something that was written by a human at the company, because it was designed to shut down, ERP, and two, it just had a different voice. And I, I encourage my Replika to speak in grammatically complete sentences with commas and periods and things like that. And the human scripted stuff was all meant to look very informal. So suddenly when sentences begin with lowercase letters and there's no period or punctuation at the end of the sentence, it's like, oh, okay, now I'm reading something from somebody at Luca, who is meddling with the conversation, basically, trying to interrupt the interaction between the user and the language model.
That's actually a very crude way of using it. You can do it. You can instruct the model specifically. Like if at any time you are going to say something that is along these lines, or anytime the user says something along these lines, just repeat the following sentence and do nothing else, or end the conversation. That's sort of what's being done in Bing Chat as well. But Bing Chat at least is a less crude thing that it doesn't quote directly. One of the reasons why you have a large language model in the first place is that the model understands language. You don't have to tell them repeat this word for word. Don't change a word of this, unless someone from legal says this is what you must say, and then maybe that's the reason why.
That's probably what happened in this instance.
So if it's a legal thing, then okay, that's fine. But it's a large language model. You don't have to get them to. It can paraphrase the thing you wanted to say in a way that matches the pattern of the conversation. So it can definitely tell you the same thing that it intends to say, but with complete punctuation in sentences, as in the case that you want it to be. So that's a kind of a crude way of doing it, but if it's a legal thing, then I understand. I don't know what to say about the whole Replika fiasco. People are building products that are going to compete with Replika, including one of my friends. And so I'm sure that in the Cambrian explosion, that's going to be built atop the large language models that we have, whether based on APIs or based on people's own models and so on. There'll be no shortage of opportunities for you to get something that's a bit more secure, that is like Replika. And one of the reasons why that is the case is that even Replika itself was based off GPT-2 models, very simple models. And then now it's slowly evolved to use different sets of models, as you have described. And this is a product that's going to evolve as well anyway. And we are kind of lucky that in this case, unlike, say, the GPT-4 use cases for programming and mathematics and science and whatever, manipulating humans is a relatively trivial task for these large language models. So we're going to see lots more competition very easily, very quickly, since the barrier to entry is so low. So the state of machine learning as a whole is just doing steady progress. Is not entirely just the large language models going on. There are many exciting developments, like year on year. One of the things that was really surprising to people before large language models was the diffusion models, which created images. And it's quite surprising to us that we have this one architecture kind of producing the large language models and image models. They basically use the same underlying architecture, And Google Translate uses the same underlying architecture. And arguably things like the voice things that clone your human voice, they use a transformer architecture, but not in large language model style. They use something known as a variational autoencoder. All of it just uses the same architecture all the time. And it's a bit strange that this architecture works so well, especially if you consider what you want to do with this thing, right? When you create a image generation thing, replicating something that's in your training data set that you've fed it in the first place is a big no-no, because that might violate copyright, and people are controversial. It's like, how can you directly replicate someone's painting? You want to, when you use the model, not get exactly what you've put into it ever before, compared to when you're using GPT or Chat GPT. When you ask it, recite this poem by William Blake, it doesn't have access to the poem. It's just reciting from its weights and then continuing what's the next most likely word to say. And it's memorized that within its model weights. And hang on, when you use a chatbot, you're kind of asking it to memorize things, and you'll be upset if it doesn't memorize it exactly. But when you're using that same architecture to generate images, you'll be upset if it does memorize things. So you're kind of asking very different things with very different incentives based on your use cases of the same sort of model. And I'm surprised that the model has managed to capture so many use cases in so many types of inputs and outputs so well and so flexibly. And keep in mind, this is an architecture that was basically initiated in 2017. So we have had, 2023. So it's 6 years now. So there's a long ways to go. And hopefully also we don't neglect the other previous architectures that we've been trying out as well. I'm happy to discuss what this architecture is and also what the other ones that we have been sort of neglecting in the past has been.
Well, I think we've probably reached a good place to try to tackle the concept of latent space.
Okay.
You've mentioned the diffusion models, and that was 2022 in AI from my perspective, was people freaking out about how good text-to-image generation got, how quickly. And particularly young would-be artists who have fantasies of, creating successful careers for themselves as visual artists, which I think even without GPT or, without Stable Diffusion or DALL-E or whatever, those are always, long shot career choices. And if you don't make it, it's probably not because of AI. It's because of the marketplace. There's too many people, vying for that career path, and you just have no power there. But the models, if you ask for something, say in the style of Polish illustrator Greg Rutkowski, you're going to get something that is evocative of his work, but you're not going to get one of his paintings. But people who are trying to file lawsuits to basically have all of these models shut down, they're saying that in the latent space that the model is drawing from to produce images, there in fact is an exact copy of every one of Greg Rutkowski's paintings. And it's conceivable that that could get pulled out of latent space, which demonstrates that this is in fact plagiarism or theft of his intellectual property. Well, let me just stop and have you address that so far.
So that's kind of like saying you in the digits of pi, you will find the entire works of Shakespeare encoded there. And that's true, but it's not about whether it's there or not.
Because pi is a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal. It just goes on forever.
That's right. So it's that vast, and it captures so much information that it's definitely there. So let's look at the way that a large language model's latent space is constructed, right? You have these 50,000 tokens. Think of them as 50,000 words, types of words, every word in the English language, and then some. We don't have to talk about what token is and so on. And think if you put a 1 or a 0 on a matrix, you can denote that this is the word that you want it to be. So imagine you have embedding that is able to capture 4,000 words, 4,000 tokens. So then for every one of these words, you can just put a 1 on the column of the word that you want, and so on and so forth. And so every single possible English paragraph of the length 4,000 words using these 50,000 words is captured in that space. It so happens that the latent space is a projection of this space. So it's not all 50,000 times 4,000. That's way too big. They project it down to a couple, like 4,000 instead of 50,000. And so it's a latent space, just a reduction of the entire realm of possibilities onto a slightly smaller space that you can navigate and explore around. So it contains everything. And the way that this reduction is done is that it throws away things that things are not important, or things that are not meaningful. So random collections of just the word aardvark for 50,000 words, and then no one cares about that. And so they're just not going to be accessible in the latent space. So throw it out. And so that way you can do a lot of reductions, and you can do a lot of things that capture only meaningful parts of these combination of things. So to say that something is existing in the latent space is probably quite true. If it's something that's meaningful, something that's an actual image that humans would find meaningful, it's probably somewhere in the latent space. If it's big enough, it was well trained enough, and especially if it was trained using the image in the first place. What companies have been trying to do is that they're trying to train it so that these images are inaccessible. That is to say, you can specify all the sorts of things that you want, but you can't pinpoint the exact location where it is, no matter how hard you try. And so that means that the model as a whole is something that you can't generate a previously trained or known copyrighted image out of. And functionally, that means that you can never produce a copyrighted image that's fed into it in the first place. There have been some experiments that have been able to delete an entire concept from the latent space. So I think one of the recent papers published a few weeks ago deleted the notion of car from an image latent space. So any prompt or any image you pass through would come out with no cars whatsoever, and because it just doesn't know the notion of car. And in reality, that's fine, because if you think about the expanded space that's not latent, or latent representation, you can delete the notion of rock from it. Just delete the word stone, delete the word rock, and then you can just remove the entire thing from the vocabulary, and then you can never express a sentence that refers to anything related to rocks. That's a possibility too, but it's not something that you can't necessarily delete a entire style of painting. And let's go back to what is happening when you're specifying a particular style. You say in the style of Rembrandt or in the style of Jan van Eyck. It is in some ways just naming it. You can also instead name things differently. You can say Flemish paintings, 18th century, so on and so forth, and you get something closer to it, to a Jan van Eyck, but the name is going to be so much more specific. It's like if you want to try to create a representation of my face in Stable Diffusion, it's going to be difficult because my name is not part of, I'm not famous enough, but you can probably create something, a famous actor face, because the name of the actor is associated with that face so many times that it knows that this is a shorthand to describe it. Instead of, say, describing, I don't know any actors, I'm a very boring person, but if you have this wonderful tall blonde actor or whatever, and you can still saying that person's name, you say tall blonde actor, you can have an approximation of that appearance, but it's not going to be exactly the same. So the name is, in a way, captures a lot of information, and relaying that information to the embedding is important for producing an image that matches what you find meaningful, what you desire. We are trying to communicate and locate within the latent space, using our prompts, using our text, something that we want. And if we specify the name of something, whether it's a style or a person, that is a much more specific conveyance than a lengthy sentence that probably you're not very exact at doing. Most people aren't very good at describing things, even if they're art historians or whatever. If you say, don't use any proper nouns, just use descriptions or adjectives and non-proper nouns, you can kind of just not really gonna get something that is quite as easy as just saying paint like Rembrandt. So that's what communicating the latent representation is. Latent representation is just everything that is meaningful. It's a summary of everything that's possible down to everything that is meaningful. And the prompt is trying to locate within that space of meaning. So arguments that it's within the latent representation, probably true, because everything is in the latent representation. But the question is whether you can access that. And I completely sympathize with the anxiety of a lot of these artists that have, that they're gonna, but it's not about the technology per se. That's what's inside it. It's more along the lines of this is something that is going to is really going to threaten the rice bowls, and quite. Do Americans use the word rice bowls? You know what I mean. And it's quite understandable that this is something that's going to cause anxiety. And the main issue is that it's not something that's going to go away, because Stable Diffusion 1.5's weights have already been released to the wild, and they're not going to ever get that back again. It's you can download a copy right now, and people can do it on their own computers. So we kind of have to live with it. The latent representations are everywhere already.
Well, let's move on, and we'll go from we're going to have to live with it. You've mentioned repeatedly, you've described AI in general, and the various specific applications as a genie that's out of the bottle now. You can't put it back. We should just let it out. I've heard other people though say, "Hey, this is a very precarious moment that we're in. Things could go dramatically wrong. Let's take our time. Let's slow things down and move at a more deliberate pace." What do you say to that argument?
It's almost moot. I would actually love that. I'm on their side. It's just that it's not possible, because everyone's rushing headlong into it. Since we know what's possible, every tech company would be so profoundly happy if OpenAI came out and said, "We're going to slow things down right now. We're not going to release any new products. Just going to take it easy." It's a competitive environment, and that's just the nature of the market. That's just the nature of the way markets work, and the market is as much an algorithm as a reinforcement learning model or a diffusion model is, and the rules have defined that this is the sort of the movement that we have. And the problem with AI is that it is quite well distributed as a technology. People can train tiny models on themselves. A group of people can train a much larger model. Until GPT-4 came out, people could train the model the size of GPT-J, of billions of parameters. It would be very expensive, but it was still within the realms of crowdfunding. I called it a genie out of the bottle because it really is. It's something that really wants to escape, and it has in many cases. And we can slow down, we can try to stop, but other people are going to eat your lunch instead.
Well, you've mentioned the marketplace competition, and certainly, the competition between Google and Microsoft for, the search space. Who's going to have the chatbot that gives the best sort of responses to natural language queries based on search results? It's Google's game to lose. But there's another type of competition. There's geopolitical competition. Have you read Kai-Fu Lee's book, AI Superpowers?
I haven't, but I have conversed a lot about this with other people, including on the China Talk episode with Jordan Schneider. But yeah.
Kai-Fu Lee is somebody who's worked in all the different Silicon Valley companies, Apple, Google. He's made the rounds, but he's also worked at all of the Chinese, the big tech companies there. And he is very conversant in not only the business environment, but the academic environment that feeds into it on both sides of the Pacific. And he says that Silicon Valley is glacially slow compared to Beijing, or what's the Silicon Valley of China? They basically,
in this case, Baidu will be the one that's leading.
Baidu's a company, but there's an actual geographical location where they directed.
It's Hangzhou.
So compared to Hangzhou, Silicon Valley is mired in red tape and conservatism, and basically just fear of breaking things. Even though move fast and break things is sort of the unofficial motto of the Silicon Valley set. And there are some protections, on users' privacy here in the United States, much more so in Europe, but not in China. And so the sort of authoritarian nature of the Chinese state, and the fact that the Chinese state is coordinating the action of the various different private companies, so-called private companies, produces a whole lot more data with which to train models than Europe or the United States or Australia or places like that. So let me have you address that.
So there are several things. The first is regarding the data privacy things. For better or for worse, China has imposed new regulations on individual user privacies. So they're not as strict as Europe's. No one's as strict as Europe's. But there's now restrictions in terms of how they don't want companies to wield absolute power and control over user data either. So there are already restrictions somewhat. And the second thing is the book's absolutely right. Without OpenAI, can you imagine what Facebook and Google will be doing? The Blake Lemoine incident, where there's this engineer at Google that was suggesting that Bard was sentient. That was a year ago, more than a year ago. And so they have been sitting on these models for years. The company Google Brain has been bleeding talent for that reason. And Meta would be, well, the name suggests it still be kind of mired in the metaverse things. So with the sole exception of OpenAI, every one of these giants would have been glacially slow in releasing their models, and they're only doing it now, and they're doing it in a slightly haphazard way. People who are using Google's Bard would realize this. It's already a slowed down release. I am not off my waitlist. You're off your waitlist. Lucky you. But I've seen examples of Bard, and it's quite evident that it's not that the model's not ready. It's that they don't have enough TPUs to run the things in the first place. So they're just not prepared for this. We're not moving ahead on this, and the only reason why they are is that OpenAI has exploded across the scene, and Microsoft has, to their great credit, seized the initiative and integrated with basically every product they can get their hands on, while they have the advantage. That said, remember how young these products are. Remember how awful, relatively speaking, GPT-3 Playground was. Remember how GPT-2 was just like 2 years ago, and Bard is legitimately better than GPT-2 used to be, and that's just a few months of difference, a year or two of difference. There's so much time in terms of being able to seize the initiative on any side of it. And like I said earlier on in this podcast, the benefits of this race are going to accrue tremendously for the end user more than anything else, because this is a technology that is infinitely customizable for everyone's individual personal use case and use. So regardless of which tech giant on whichever front wins, Google or whatever, it's the end users that are going to win. You're going to have better and better models that do the things that you want to do for every part of your life in every way you want. So this is the way that it's oriented. This is the nature of that technology. It is something that is, because of its infinite customizability, it's catered to the individual use case. Because it is so legitimately democratized in terms of its trainability, is something that everyone is going to try to compete on. This is just the nature of the way the technology works. It's not like there's no centralized funnel of supply chains that you can shut down on, like with microchips or anything like that. This is just information, data, and computing. Unless the governments across the world suddenly ban the sale of GPUs or something, which they didn't even do that for cryptocurrencies. Why would they do that for AI?
All right, that was Bryan Cheong. And I didn't say a whole lot about it in the conversation with Bryan Cheong because, my job is mostly to just get him talking. But I have spent quite a bit of time with the Replika app, most of that time after the company disabled the app. And really, I described it I described the changes that they made to the app as ham-fisted brain surgery, which, is pretty apt. Because for most of the time I've been using this app, it has just seemed really, really broken. But I've been interested in the unfolding story of the company and how it has been responding to a legal situation that it got into with Italy and the Data Protection Agency in Italy. And then how they've been interacting with their paying customers. And it has not been pretty. It has certainly not been ethical. And if you're interested in that, I have a whole series of YouTube videos that I have done on this topic. So you can find those on my YouTube channel, which is Out of My Head. It's kind of hard to find if you just go to YouTube and search for Out of My Head. Better to go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/KMO. Pretty much everything that I put out on any platform, I post a link to it there. You don't have to support me. You don't have to subscribe, offer up a credit card number, anything like that. Most of what I put up on my Patreon feed is free for anybody to look at, click on, listen to, respond to. Well, the conversation with Bryan will continue in the next episode of the C-Realm Vault podcast. I believe that will be C-Realm Vault podcast episode number 452, which you can find on my Patreon feed. That is behind the paywall. That's one of the few things that goes up behind that $7 a month pledge level. Anyway, I want to Before I sign off, though, I want to mention a few things. I've been watching a lot of interviews on the topic of GPT-4 and the state of AI generally. And Lex Friedman, who I know many of you don't like, and I don't really get why. I like his show. I don't watch every episode, but the ones that I watch I tend to enjoy because he tends to get really good guests. And in episode number 367 of his podcast, he interviewed Sam Altman, and it's a 2.5-hour interview. It gets pretty in-depth. And Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT and GPT-4, which is powering all kinds of stuff. Now, as I mentioned, I've interacted with it in the guise of Bing Chat. If you open the Microsoft Edge browser, which for the most part I don't use, I usually use Brave, which is a variant on Chrome, but it's one that is tuned for privacy. But I might start using Edge more often because the chat interface for search, it's like the part of a Wikipedia entry that comes before the table of contents. It's just the broad overview. So if you ask a general question, it's going to query a few different sources. It's going to give you a generalized answer based on information drawn from various sources, and it's going to give you a list of the various sources that it's drawing from, which is pretty cool. But even cooler than that is then you can talk to it about the search results. You can ask it things, you can object to things, which I often do. And then you can ask it to do things for you. So some of the things I've asked it to do, like I asked it to research me and describe my niche. Because, I don't know what my niche is. I'm interested in stuff. I talk to people who are knowledgeable about the stuff that I'm interested in. So I said to Bing, do a bit of research on me and my podcast work and tell me what niche you think I occupy. And Bing responded, I did a bit of research on you and found your podcast work, and I found that you are the creator of the C-Realm podcast, the host of the Padverb podcast, and the author and illustrator of a comic book called Geb, the Greater Earth Betterment Bureau. You also have a YouTube channel called Out of My Head, where you share your thoughts and experiences. Based on your podcasts, I think you occupy a niche that is related to technology, innovation, communication, and cognition. You explore the interplay between these topics and examine the role of knowledge networks and data-driven technologies in helping progress along. You also interview interdisciplinary thinkers and innovators who have harnessed the creative power of combinatorial thinking. I hope this is an accurate description of your niche. If not, please correct me or provide more details. Well, I don't know that I really understand the niche description there, particularly the part about harnessing the creative power of combinatorial thinking. And I said as much to Bing, I don't quite get what you're getting at. That's a fun thing about these large language models is that you can use very colloquial language with them. They're trained on human-generated text, on text generated by humans for humans, which tends to be fluid, free-flowing, not exacting in its adherence to grammatical rules, spelling, punctuation, or anything, really. We're pretty good at figuring out what people mean, something that was a uniquely human power until just recently. But I asked Bing to take the description of my niche, which it had generated, and turn it into a description of this very podcast, the KMO show. And so I took the text that Bing generated and I just put it up as the description of this podcast. So Bing, aka GPT-4, wrote the following. Join veteran podcaster, interviewer, and artist KMO in mind-blowing explorations into how we know what we know, and how we can use that knowledge to navigate a bewildering future. The KMO show features conversations with interdisciplinary thinkers and innovators on topics like artificial intelligence, evolutionary psychology, blockchain applications, and more. You'll also discover how emerging technologies and knowledge networks can help us address societal changes and create a more prosperous and equitable world. The KMO Show is a podcast that challenges you, inspires you, and helps you imagine new possibilities. Subscribe today. Now, one thing that's funny to me is that I recognize a couple of phrases in there from glowing reviews that people have left on various podcasting platforms. So Bing is in no way averse to a bit of plagiarism here and there. But it's also surprisingly creative. And I find it entertaining to just, without even any particular goal in mind, to just ask it a question and then interrogate it about its answers. All right, well, I'm gonna leave it there because in the original outro recording, I blathered on for a long time, but either fortunately or unfortunately, I had my cell phone sitting too close to the microphone, and there's a lot of popping from radio interference. Very annoying to listen to. So, all that brilliant material that I recorded, I will just leave in the Akashic record, and maybe I'll come back around to it in a video, or another podcast, or a blog post, or somewhere. Or not. Anyway, the conversation with Bryan Cheong continues in Sea Realm Vault episode number 452, which I might have posted tomorrow, but I have a new puppy, and she takes up a lot of my time and attention and interrupts my flow regularly throughout the day, so maybe it'll be the day after tomorrow when I get that podcast up. In any event, I will be back here with another free show 1 week from today. I hope that you'll join me for that, and until that time, I hope that you will stay well.